at the Independence. It is Wednesday, and I am broadcasting live on X, YouTube, and Facebook. Thank you for joining me. We will be talking today about how the settled science was manufactured during COVID with the lab leak theory. It took 6 years, but I am vindicated. As it is, because we're in the studio here at the Manchester Public Television Studio. I will be talking to the cameras over there. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys on the flip side.
Coming to you live from the heart of the free state of New Hampshire, this is the Independence with Carla, Gericke. And now, here's your host, Carla, Gericke.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Independence. I'm thrilled to be here with you. It is Wednesday. Spring has sprung, which of course means for most of us that allergies are also kicking in. But I'm so happy to be joining you guys today with what I regard as actually a little bit of good news for a change. You know, anyone who watches this show knows I often say accountability is really where everything breaks down. It doesn't help we know how things are going wrong if nothing is, one, ever reformed, or two, if the people who made the problems are never held to account. So I was really excited to see yesterday that Morens, who is basically Fauci's right-hand man, he's behind the scenes fixer, you might say, has been indicted by the Trump administration. And this feels like a really good step in the right direction. Now, I think the easiest way to think about this is, turns out the conspiracy theorists like me were the actual early reality adopters. So turns out even the CIA now agrees that the lab leak theory is the most plausible theory for what happened during COVID. So today we're going to do a deep dive into Morens's indictment, which dropped yesterday's. I'm going to talk a little bit about how they manufactured, because this was engineered. It wasn't accidental. The people you pay taxes to made up a giant cover story and then persuaded you that the people who told you what was really going on were the ones who were nuts. And then, so how they manufactured that settled science, which we heard so much about, and how to make sure you don't get tricked sometime in the future. So how was the settled science manufactured? Well, yesterday, the Department of Justice did indict David Morens. He was Fauci's longtime senior scientific advisor at the NIAID. He was indicted on conspiracy charges. The words finally made it there. And when we talk about how never to get tricked again, that's actually the trick, is every time you see the state trot out the words conspiracy theorist, and then the establishment get behind that on an issue, that is actually a tell that they are lying to you. So when you see something in the news, or it bubbles up in your feed, or it's in your narrative, and you're hearing this repetitive thing where a bunch of people who are making some claim where you're like, that actually sounds kind of likely, and there's being a pile on them, that behavior is the little red flag you should be looking for. So Morens was indicted on conspiracy against the United States charges, plus destroying and concealing federal records. Now, lots of you know that I do a lot of open government work, 91A here in New Hampshire, and our New Hampshire Constitution, Article 8, of course, is where we talk about our state's open government stuff. But on the federal level, those are called FOIA requests, right? And part of the way that all this eventual truth came out is because citizen journalists, reporters, curious people, critical thinkers, people who are like, man, something smells a little rotten here, filed and kept filing FOIA requests, getting little pieces here and there, and then finally putting together the puzzle, which looks pretty bad for the administration, for the government, for the deep state, for the red tape bureaucrats. The indictment says Morens and his co-conspirators deliberately hid information to suppress the alternative theories about the origins of COVID-19. And this is not speculation. This is the government charging the cover-up that happened as an actual felony. Now, I think Fauci, of course, should also get indicted, but you might recall that, Biden, in I guess, a moment of clarity in between all the senility we were seeing at the end there, with his auto pen, being sarcastic, gave Fauci a blanket future pardon for all things related to this. We only have 2 weeks left when the statute of limitation runs out on who can, I believe, be indicted under this set of facts. So I don't know if we're going to see something in the next 2 weeks or not, but I will tell you, I did not have this on my bingo card, but I did tweet it out this morning. I got 0 likes, which to me tells me 100% shadow banned, but got a lot of engagement, strangely, on Facebook, where I talked about what the White House is doing. And as part of that, I added a screen grab from the White House website on a specific landing page where, of course, they had to put Trump in the middle. I might not have done that, but it's a giant lab leak, the origins of COVID, with like Trump in the middle. So that to me signals as well that they understand this is probably a good issue for them to get behind. I think a lot of people are waking up perhaps now after the fugue of what happened during COVID and are now coming out of that, and perhaps are ready now to sort of hear the alternative, correct, right, truthful, reality-based theories. And what was that theory? Was from the start, A or B? Which one sounds more likely to you guys? Wet market pangolin. None of you had ever even thought about, known about, or anything about a pangolin in your life, right? So on the face of it, that just the fact that it was a pangolin seems sus. So wet market pangolin that caused everyone to drop dead, or actually what the reality was, which was it was a lab leak from a gain of function virus that escaped at the Wuhan lab that made several of the scientists ill, and then there was a giant cover-up. So what did that cover-up look like? All right, let's see if we can take a look at that. Now, why do I take this so personally? It's because I was heavily censored on this topic. The Twitter files have come out and said, oh, this happened. Big tech's kind of like, oops, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have listened to Big Bro so hard. But of course, nothing is changing, or very little is changing, because indeed, at least they indicted this guy. Now, we got to see if something actually happens or if this is just lip service. But let's go back to February 2020. Let's cast our minds back, right? So this was just weeks after the world had heard about the virus. And suddenly, the Lancet, which of course is an establishment journal where the science with giant capitalization takes place. So the Lancet publishes a letter signed by 27 prominent scientists in which they said, "We stand together strongly to condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." So the Lancet was the most effective early narrative control operation in the COVID origin story. So I think we should be very suspicious of anything that is placed in the Lancet going forward, because they have shown their mala fides. And why am I saying that? Because institutions should earn our trust. And when they do things that are clearly against human flourishing, in order to protect people who made, mad scientists who literally made a virus more virulent, because in their paranoid fantasies, they were like, someone else might do this sometime in the future, so we need to be prepared. Now, can we just cut the timeline there for a second? So if you stop in that moment in the now, who's the bad guy? The person making the enhanced virus at that very time. It doesn't matter what your intention is, you're the person making the virus more virulent. You are the bad guy. This isn't complicated. And of course, Fauci back in 2012 actually said in an interview in the Australian, and this information was also censored off the internet, said, you know, a gain of function pandemic, or if it gets released, will probably be worth it. Now, I don't know about you and me and the children whose educations have become worse, people who have speech impediments, lots of people with vaccine harm, just a general malaise in society at large, whether we indeed, in Fauci's words, believe it was worth it. So this letter that went out in the Lancet was drafted and orchestrated by who? By Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance. Now, who are these little bad guys? I think he's the co-conspirator, by the way, or he's co-indicted on this claim, but he was the head guy at the very group that was funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He didn't disclose his conflicts of interest. And that letter that was published with these 27 people that you should never trust again, whose reputations should be in the toilet, and justly so, the letter was used then by the media, by platforms, and by officials to shut down any discussion about the lab accident. And when I say shut down, you know, I do these cable access shows with other people from time to time. And back then in 2020, I did a show with Gary and Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. It's a local show here as well. And that show got like wholesale taken off YouTube. I couldn't believe it. It probably had a few hundred views. And I was like, wow, they are that worried about like just regular folks talking and speaking about the truthful situations. So what was happening while they were doing this publicly with their letter to the Lancet? What was happening privately at the exact same time? On February 1st, Christian Anderson emailed Fauci saying the furin cleavage site in the virus was stunning and the genome looked inconsistent with evolutionary theory. So what was happening? Real scientists were going, the smoking gun is the furin cleavage site, which anyone with half a brain who can read science papers actually knew at this time, February 2020. And we were like, dudes, it's really obvious. If you understand basic science, the furin cleavage site seems, I don't know, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's give it a 9, versus wet market pangolin, which sounds like something that Disney CIA came up with. Let's give that a 3. So they knew, while they were lying to you, they knew that it was a lab leak. On that same day, Fauci, King Fauci, your white lab coat mad scientist, held a press conference with his top scientists, and they were actually discussing the lab leak origin. Now, here's the part you have to understand. Fauci got caught with his fingers in the cookie jar, so to speak, because they knew they had funded the gain of function research. They knew there was a lab leak, and they were like, oh my God, if we've caused a pandemic across the world, what can we possibly do? Let's ask our ethicist. Dunk, dunk, dunk. Who's Fauci's ethicist? His wife. You cannot make this stuff up. I know I sound like a tinfoil hatter, but all of these things are true. So what did the wife, I think, recommend? Because this is speculation, but they decided not to go with the truth and say it was the lab leak, and decided instead to go with their wet market pangolin, if you have a different opinion, you're a racist approach to things. Okay. So seriously, they were actually in February considering the lab leak theory. Then they flipped. So then they wrote the proximal origin paper, which was published in March 17th in Nature Medicine, which declared a lab origin improbable. Then Francis Collins emailed Fauci, hoping the paper would put down the conspiracy. Fauci himself had described this as prompting the paper. This is the reason they wrote it, right? So they knew that it would start to muddy the waters, right? Because that's all you have to do. You just have to create enough confusion, point your fingers at enough conspiracy theorists. That creates a chilling effect, because now people are like either like posting into the void, like I tend to do, or they actually start to silence themselves with self-censorship, because they are like, oh, I guess I must be wrong, right? So they knew it pointed to the lab leak, but they chose narrative control instead. So then the same machine operated on lockdown policy. So then, of course, on the flip side, later in the year, we had the Great Barrington Declaration with Jay Bhattacharya, right, who's now in NIH. There was Suntra Gupta from Oxford and Martin Kullerdorf, who he and Jay actually came to PorcFest in 2023, the same year RFK showed up. So they released that Great Barrington Declaration, and they argued against, you know, the lockdown policy, and they were like, hey guys, like, what are we doing here? We have questions. The science is not settled, right? But what happened to them? They were smeared as dangerous, censored, and professionally attacked, right? So yes, Bhattacharya is now the director of NIH. Okay. So how did this consensus, this manufactured, this engineered truth, this fake story, the government's actual conspiracy theory to confuse you about real facts, how did they get that done? So they used trusted journalists, another list of people we should treat with skepticism, who acted as their amplifiers. So a lot of it was done, shockingly, through the Council for Foreign Relations, which was a little twist I only learned this morning. But there was Lori Garrett, and she was one of the earliest voices calling the lab leak theory racist, right? Because that is the magic trick to shut things down. Now you can't say, I mean, I don't know which one's like, isn't a wet market pangolin? Kind of, I don't know. I'm like, if you're going to play the racist card, I think there are many ways that could have gone. There was a Helen Branswell, Carl Zimmer, Amy Maxman, and John Cohen at Science. So these are journalists, these are government mouthpieces that repeatedly cited the Lancet letter and the proximal origin as as definitive, while dismissing any counter evidence. Now, if you were curious about this topic back in maybe it was in 21, but there was a great book that came out that I want to say it's Alina Chen, but I might be wrong, and Matt Ridley, Viral. And that was really, once I read that, I was 100% persuaded. It is a deep dive. And once that book came out, the question should really have just been put to rest. But the reason it wasn't is because it was a coordinated effort to protect Fauci's career. Like, literally, this is a cover story for like a rogue guy who has been paid. He was paid the most as a federal employee out of everyone, including the president. So if you believe in follow the money, you gotta know, man, you're not up there because you're great. You're up there because you're rotten. So they were there to protect careers, grants, international relationships between the US and China, and the entire biosecurity environment, which is a whole big area that no one really has their hands on or understands what's going on. But based on what happened during COVID, it's not good, right? So the reckoning is now here. EcoHealth and Daszak have been debarred. Morens, as I mentioned, has been indicted. And the White House now has that page up acknowledging the lab leak as the true origins. So with the last maybe 10 minutes that we probably have here, I do want to talk a little bit about how you can guard yourself against this kind of stuff happening in the future. So people will ask me, like, how did you know? And that is a good question, because honestly, I saw stuff about the lab leak in my X feed very early on. And I kind of, to this day, I wish I had been paying more attention to be like, where is this information actually seeding from? Like, I was just getting it. And now I'm curious as to who those sources were. But understanding this trick that they play with your mind to make you believe things that are not true is a skill that you can develop the skill to guard yourself against this kind of behavior. So if you don't know this, maybe you're the last person on earth. But the word conspiracy theory is actually something that the CIA came up with, right? It came out in countering criticism of the Warren Report. And they were basically like, hey, we have to smear people who are saying the lone gun theory in the JFK shooting is they're conspiracy theorists. So again, when you start to hear when you notice there's a directed effort towards smearing an entire thing as conspiracy theory, that is your tell. So that is the same tell as you see in vaccine science, of course, because now that we're delving into that side of things too, the truth is becoming apparent. And we're realizing, oh, maybe instead of calling people names, we should have analyzed their positions a little more. So basically, when the CIA picked up on conspiracy theory as a phrase, this is when it went from being sort of a neutral term, which had appeared in the newspaper and stuff since the 1800s, into a psychological warfare tool. So logic can also help you as to why the label itself is often the tell. So an anomaly plus suppression equals rational suspicion. Let me say that again. Something weird happens plus suppression of that something weird, that should make you go, huh, what's going on there? Maybe I should stick my nose into this business, because why are they spinning, right? So this is usually when something big happens. I mean, we've seen a ton of assassination attempts, terrorist attacks, some kind of new threat that they just come up with, like, I don't know, an imminent threat from Iran that just happened like overnight, right? So when you notice that behavior, make sure you like perk up and go, what's going on now? You might see things like cover-ups create the very conspiracy accusations they mock, right? So then it becomes like really confusing really fast, right? But the institutions are there to protect their power, their funding, and their reputations in the now. So if they can get away with lying to you now, in the present, the big lie, as we call it in propaganda circles, then even when the truth comes out 6 years later, like we're at now, then it's like, it's so muddied the waters that no one really knows what to believe. People like me may feel vindicated, but many of you back at home may just feel gaslit or confused or frustrated or angry. And all of those things can be channeled into action. So, things we can learn. Here's why mind control works on most people, and I'm using that term sort of generically, but human brains are wired for efficiency, right? Not for perfect truth seeking. So you defer to experts. Stop doing that. Okay. You conform. So everyone was saying, oh, we're all so scared. So everyone just got into a big scaredy cat club. That was not something you should have done. You also we default to a need for certainty. And so we just wanted an answer. And so clinging to this idea of the wet market and the pangolin and the drama of that. And of course, it must have been evolutionary because, oh no, if it's not evolutionary, it must mean someone screwed up. And now we got to go find them and hold them to account. So we're starting with Morens. We'll see. So, if you don't believe me about what I'm talking about here, please still go read the website, the White House's website. But also do yourself a favor and just dive into how many times the term conspiracy theories has been deployed against things that later turned out to be true. Some of those I'll just read really quickly if you're looking for like a punch list to go through at some stage. MK Ultra, right? That was literally the CIA's mind control experiments. There's the, I can never say this, Tuskegee syphilis study, right? That's where the government, I don't know, actually gave people syphilis, didn't tell them, didn't give them medicine. Oops. There's the Gulf of Tonkin. That whole thing was kind of fabricated. Big tobacco. I mean, if you learn nothing from tobacco science to vaccine science, then you got some homework to do. The Iran-Contra scandal, and of course now the lab leak COVID origin story. So it took 6 years for us to get to this point. What can you do going forward? Train your own reflex to be like, hey, if something weird happens and someone is being told they're a conspiracy theorist for looking into it, that is the moment you should be like, what's going on? Let's investigate harder. Demand primary sources, FOIA and 91A, the crap out of everything. This is how we're going to win. Follow the money, flip public and private statements, look for the patterns, and follow the people like me who were right from the start. So I'm out of time. This went so fast. I got 14 piles more of paper I wanted to talk about. But basically, what I want to leave you with is a sense of empowerment to understand you don't have to cede your mind to experts. You don't have to believe the things they tell you. You are allowed to have your own opinions, to express your own opinions, and to actually disagree with them, because turns out these people are in it for themselves. There is, like I said last week, no such thing as public health. There is only your health and my health. And today, I wish you great health. So, out of time, I wish you guys all peace, love, and understanding. And I'll be back again next week. Thanks. All right. I ran out of time. Thanks for joining me here, guys. I will see you next week. Bye.